Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where I get to talk with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And I'm really excited today because I've got a legend, a really smart guy here. His name is Joey Gilkey. He's the CEO and founder of Tribe Outbound. Built his career on selling high-value products and services in a non-salesy, ethical way to some of the largest companies in the world and in really competitive industries. And over the years, he noticed that the majority of companies that he dealt with were really struggling to tap into their dream market. And so the company that he founded in 2017 really is a solution for companies' sales problems. He flips sales around and really emphasizing empathy in the sales process, which we'll talk about, building a high-class team of specialists who really focuses on going into particular companies. And we'll talk about account-based selling and what that means, and going after dream clients that you want to work with, which is a big part of what he does as well. So really fascinating stuff. But first, of course, before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media. At Rise25, we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with our Done For You podcast and content marketing. You're listening to one right now, and you've probably listened and thought before, hey, should I do a podcast? Well, I say absolutely. We specialize in helping B2B businesses with high client lifetime value to make a podcast profitable for them. So to learn more, go to rise25.com, and you can learn all about it. You can also email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Joey. So my business partner, Jeremy, is a big fan of yours. He's interviewed you before, and he's interviewed some big people, but after he interviewed you, he was raving. He was like a little schoolgirl or something like that, just completely raving about the experience of talking to you. And I listened to that episode and was really blown away as well. You've got a lot of different approaches and philosophies around pursuing like large clients, dream clients, not just one, but and not just 10, but like 500 of them. So I want to dive into that. But first, before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your background. You're a born salesman at like 3 years old. You're going around the neighborhood selling chocolate bars, or what were you like as a kid?
Cool. Yeah. Well, first, John, thanks for having me on. And yes, I'm also a big fan of Jeremy. So maybe it's a man crush going on. But yeah, man. So growing up, I did not grow up in an entrepreneurial household. My dad was a blue collar worker. He started in Home Depot, still working for Home Depot now 30 years later. And he was working for Home Depot, midnight graveyard shift in the lumber yard. And now he's in corporate doing very well for himself. And so I come from a very hardworking family, but not entrepreneurial. I didn't grow up selling candy on the streets to folks. I didn't have the entrepreneurial bug necessarily. They got attributes that led to it in terms of like leadership. And for me, my whole career, or my whole childhood growing up was about sports. So for me, I played every sport you can imagine at some point, and then through high school, eventually played football, got drafted in the MLB as well. Very low rounds, so it's not that impressive. If you actually know anything about the MLB draft, a lot of kids get drafted but never go play. And then I went off to play football in college, actually, at a small Division I school called Presbyterian College. But yeah, man, I didn't grow up with even the business bug, to be honest. My whole life was about sports. And then in my college years, it became more about ministry, like full-time Christian ministry, and which in and of itself is entrepreneurial, but I wouldn't have called it that at the time. But it definitely prepared me for the career I've now been on.
I'm actually fascinated by that because when I was in college, I was very into politics, and I went door to door for people's for candidates and causes and things like that. And I'm fascinated by people who've done that, whether it's door to door sales for selling a product or a cause or a political candidate. It's selling ultimately, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, for me, I after college, I did go into full-time ministry. And so one thing I learned in full-time ministry was if you want to have any sort of living or salary, you had to go raise your income. So it's what they call support raising. And that taught me how to sell first, which actually, it's funny when I think about it. I would attribute my sales skills actually to my dad first, and then secondly to being in ministry, raising support, to go on missions, to go on, summer projects, leadership projects, and then ultimately to fund my wife and I's full-time ministry at the time.
And so who did you approach about that? Was it family members? Was it members of your church? Was it friends?
Yeah. If you've ever heard the term like center of influence, COIs, like for me, it was all about who were my centers of influence. And so it started with family, then it went to friends, then it went to church members. I didn't grow up in the church, which was interesting. So I actually didn't become a Christian and start going to church until about 17 years old. So I really didn't have a church base back where I grew up. I pretty much had about 1 year while in high school, and then went on to college and moved to a different state. And so I didn't really have a home church. And so for me, it was a lot of centers of influence, asking families. And then when they would support me, it would then be, who do you know that would be interested in funding a ministry like this? And so for me, it really was kind of the grassroots of what I would call, account-based selling now, right? It was one-off, getting the attention of people, whether it be people I knew or people that were referred. At the bottom of what we call the Dream 500 process, we talk about activation and expansion. So after you land a deal, your process doesn't stop. Right? There's an activation period and then an expansion period. Activation is turning them into a raving fan or an ambassador for your brand and what you do. And then expansion is obviously upselling. So asking for more funds at the time, or expanding externally, which is they refer you into more relationships. Honestly, in business, it's the most profitable approach to business is retention, activation, and expansion. Everyone gets obsessed about acquisition. But where the real money and where the real profitability comes in is when your clients refer you to your next clients, who refer you to your next clients, because there is no cost per acquisition there.
Is that hard? Now, you serve clients and you help clients to do that. Is that a harder thing to sell to prospective clients? Say, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to your existing clients and we're going to get more money out of them, versus the sexy idea of we're going to bring in a bunch of new clients.
Yeah, it is. Well, if you start the relationship that way, yeah, sure. It's very difficult to be like, after we do some work, I'm expecting you to drop me 3 new referrals and stuff like that. Like that, yes, of course, that's hard. But the way that I look at it, I call it more of like a trust transaction model. It's something that we kind of build internally or we talk about internally. And when you're going through like traditional acquisition, right? When you're doing sales, the first important, and think of it like stair stepping, right? So as you go up a stair level, more trust is built. At the bottom, the first stair is what we call attention. So before you could ever make a sale, you have to get their attention. Secondly, and this stair is usually skipped over, it's likability, right? It's building relationship built on likability. And the reason that people skip over that is because they want to get to the next step pretty quickly, which is what we call credibility, right? So a relationship built on credibility. Transactions can't happen without credibility. So that is true. That's why people want to jump there and say, here's what we can do for you. Here's case study, case study, case study. Those are important. But my argument is if you have likability first, one, it's going to strengthen the close. You can't close a deal on likability alone. But you're going to get so many more at bats to present credibility if you have likability first. So it goes attention, likability, credibility, and then what we call a trust transaction. So a transaction that's based on trust. And then the next part is retention, expansion, et cetera. And so if you continue to climb the trust ladder, if you will, or you take each step at a time. When you have both likability and credibility and you're able to service them well, asking for referrals is supernatural. It's not even, oftentimes you don't have to ask for it. It just kind of happens. And so, yes, if you start the relationship that way and you don't have likability or credibility and you haven't delivered yet, it's challenging to come in and say, yep, let's just go straight for referrals. Just expect that I'm going to ask you here shortly.
Right. It's funny because I'm a big believer in that, what you just said, that you have to have likability, you have to have some kind of bond and rapport with people that you're going to sell to. So personally, I believe in that. I was preparing for another interview, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, with Oren Klaff, who's the author of Flip the Script. Jeremy also interviewed him recently. And in his recent book, he kind of argues that likability is not always a good thing. And I'm misstating it, but basically what he said is that salespeople sometimes have multiple different personas. And so at different points in the sales conversation, in the beginning, they're trying to be likable. In the end, they're like being hard and trying to pressure them. And other times they're trying to establish their credibility. And what damages the sales process is that it almost seems schizophrenic, like the salesperson has different personalities. And so he's almost arguing against the importance of building that bond and rapport. What are your thoughts on that piece? Do you think that you can be good at sales without being likable?
Yes. Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think if you've ever read the book, The Challenger Sale, I don't think that you have to be likable necessarily to get the deal. I think it helps a lot. I think it also helps with retention. And though my entire world, my businesses, everything is revolved around acquisition, that's what people obsess about is acquisition. I argue that retention is so much more important. So money in the door is important, but keeping money in the door is even more valuable. And so I do think that it's challenging to create that type of relationship where they are referring if you don't have likability. So I don't disagree with Oren in that way. I do believe you can have success by being a challenger sale type person. And a challenger sale is really just someone who has the ability to be super valuable by re-educating the buyer, right? Like you have to educate the buyer on how to buy, because oftentimes how they bought in the past is incorrect or it's led to poor results. And so you have to educate them on why they're buying the way they buy. That's an effective model. I would just argue that a layer on top of that is adding likability. So I don't disagree with them. You can be successful. I know what's been successful for me and for us, and that is by introducing likability. Now, what I said earlier is a transaction is not going to happen based on a relationship built on likability alone, right? Like no one's going to shoot me $250K to do what we do simply because they like me, right? Like it's a big undertaking. And so, but what my argument is if I have likability, I'm able to have more at bats to prove my credibility, which will then ultimately increase my conversion, increase how many deals I'm able to close.
So let's talk about the credibility piece. What are some of the building blocks of that? How do you establish your credibility?
Yeah, I think that the challenger sale is a component of that, being able to educate the buyer. But I think a layer behind that would be, we talk a lot at Tribe and Joe Gilkey and Company about dream clients, right? And the dream market. Really understanding, putting yourself in the shoes of, or what we call empathy-driven sales, putting yourself in the seat or the shoes of the buyer to understand who they are, allows you to really understand, well, one, it creates likability, right? So there's that part. Yeah. Then the credibility part of that is when you're able to essentially be, I like to think of it as when you approach a prospect or a lead and you're able to essentially be, almost come across as if you are reading a page from their quote unquote fictional diary. When you can do that, that establishes credibility. When you can express authority and knowledge in a particular space that is interesting to them and or is relevant to them, that's when credibility starts to come in. And yes, case studies help facilitate that, and data and all these things do help with credibility. But I think really being able to, from a relational standpoint, being able to pinpoint, hey, this is what I know you're going through. I know that these pain points exist. I know this because these are the people I serve. You are categorically someone who I have historically served. So when that's the case, you are able to essentially read from their diary and say, I know you. I know this is your pain point. I know this is what you're walking through. I know this is what keeps you up at night. I know these are the things that essentially are keeping and bottlenecking your business from growing. So therefore, let's talk about that. And then that's when I start re-educating the buyer on, hey, you've been buying this way for so long. What if we thought about it this way? And then we start presenting some actual authority and credibility through our solution, right? So that would be where I would say how you can build credibility the most is by deploying empathy in a sales relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people, when they think of credibility, they think of, diploma where you went to school or awards or recognition, that kind of thing, rather than thinking about just a deeper, greater understanding of the person that you're talking to.
That's a great point. And I want to add one thing real quick. So if you think about LinkedIn, everybody's jumping on the LinkedIn train. I've been there for a couple of years now. But one thing about LinkedIn that we have found, and this goes for website landing pages too, is what do you think converts better? The page where you talk about your accomplishments as a business, your milestones, when your business was started, everything about you, or a page that says, hey, I know you. I know this is what you're going through, right? Because in LinkedIn specifically, people utilize LinkedIn as a resume, which is really just a me type of situation. But when you convert your LinkedIn into more of a landing page that's empathy driven, that talks and it addresses who you want to target, that's going to convert far better than, hey, I went to this school, I've done this achievement, I've created this much revenue, because you haven't addressed their problems.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And by the way, I'm looking at your LinkedIn account right now, and you practice what you preach. But it's actually a great case study because your title is, I help agency owners remove themselves from sales and build out their sales operation, which is explaining exactly what you do and who for. But then you say, created 1.3 billion in deals in 3 years, agency sales training, consulting. I'm not your guru, I'm a practitioner, which I love that piece too, because it's kind of indicating, you're actually doing it in the rolling up your sleeves. So break that down for us, why you created it that way.
Yeah. So the framework that I use is really a 3-part framework. And this goes for website copy. This goes for sales letters. This goes for your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook. So the framework that I use is, who do you serve? What is the end result of working with you? And how do you get them there? In that order, right? So oftentimes we talk about how we get them there first. We talk about the features, what we do, but they don't care about that stuff yet until they know that they're in the right place. So that's why we have, who do we serve? So for me, in this newer season of life for me, I have Tribe Outbound, which is, it's a done for you. We do Dream 500 outreach, account-based selling for companies. We keep that very, very manageable and small. The other side of the company, which is Joe Gilkey and Company, is working specifically with digital agencies, because digital agencies have a systemic issue when it comes to building out sales operations and removing agency owners from sales so that they can get past that invisible ceiling. So I want agency owners, when they come to my profile, and I have a whole strategy on how I drive people there, but when an agency owner comes to my profile, I want them to know first and foremost, they're in the right place. Who do I help? I help agency owners. Secondly, where do they want to get to? Well, I know that they want to be removed from sales and become the CEO. So that's where I take them. How do I do it? I help them build out an internal sustainable sales operation. So in that order, and then after that, I can talk about myself a little bit, which is credibility. Yes, we've generated 1.3 billion in 3 years. That's cool. That's a big number, but they don't care about that until they know they're in the right place. I can help them and I can get them where they want to go.
Right. It's out of context. If you just see the 1.3 billion first, it's like, it's what, is this even true? What does this person do? That sort of thing. That's a great way of breaking it down. So you mentioned LinkedIn, you have a strategy for getting people there. Is that,
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that and what LinkedIn has done for you.
Yeah. So the cool thing about LinkedIn is they want to drive traffic to your profile. That's why content exists. That's why they show you who's been to your profile. If you have Sales Navigator, obviously there's an added benefit there. You can see who's been there in the last 90 days. It's why they even give you a notification that says, hey, John Smith has visited your profile. See all views, right? Like they want that to be a piece of LinkedIn. And so what I do with LinkedIn is, obviously, I don't treat my profile like a resume. I treat it like a landing page. I have a framework that I work through that drives people to an eventual call to action. How I get them there, right, is the other piece of it. So when they get there, I want them to convert, but how do I get them there first? Obviously, content is super important. Posting content that is organic and native to LinkedIn's platform. You have to understand LinkedIn is a business, right? It's not just a platform that everyone gets to enjoy freely and they just keep it open for the sake of having a cool network. Like, it is a business that drives billions of dollars a year. And how do they do that? Well, they need to make sure that they have a good user experience. Why? Because they make their money by serving ads. The longer people are on their platform, the more ads they can serve, the more more money they can make. And so if you know that, and that's every platform, not just LinkedIn, when you know that a big no-no, there's an algorithm, right? When you make a post, there's an algorithm that says we should give this post more reach or we shouldn't, we should shut it down. And the algorithm is based on LinkedIn's motivation, right? If they want to push something, if they want to keep you on the platform, the algorithm is created in such a way that it's meant to do that. So just an easy tip, when you are posting organically on LinkedIn, do not have links that link out off of LinkedIn's platform. If you do that,
no, they do not like that.
You're sending people to a competitor, right? If you have a YouTube link, you're sending it to YouTube. Why is that a competitor? Well, because LinkedIn is driving video engagement right now. So you know that you need to play into their algorithm. So look at what are they playing into. The second thing is what I call network density. So as I've mentioned, agency owners is a huge market for me. It's where most of my brand is. It's where most people that follow me. I have a LinkedIn network of, I don't know, probably 11,000 or so. I would say 8,000, maybe 7,000 of those are agency owners or agency leadership. When you think about the LinkedIn network or LinkedIn algorithm, again, it's all about user experience and keeping people on the platform. So when you post content, if your content is valuable, it's going to get further reach. Why? Because it's going to keep people on the platform. They're going to keep coming back to the platform to get valuable information. Well, the way that works is when you put out a post, they're going to give a very small percentage of your network that you have connected with, your first level connections. They're going to serve your content to them first, right? And if it performs well, likes, comments, impressions, shares, if it performs well in a certain time period, they will then open up the gates to the rest of your network and then to your second level network. If it doesn't perform well, they're going to start shutting it down because it's a bad user experience. So in order to ensure that your content is relevant, if I'm creating content for agencies and my network is only filled with 20% agencies, well, the sample size that LinkedIn's going to put my content in front of probably has 80% of people who that content is irrelevant for. It's going to have low engagement, and therefore they're not going to continue to give it reach. So if I have a predominant industry or network that is dense to who I want to serve and who I talk to, I'm going to get engagement really fast. And then they're going to open it up, and I'm going to I average 10 to 15,000 views per post right now because I have a dense network. And what happens is when you produce valuable content, it gets big reach. That drives people to your profile. Your profile then serves as a landing page to convert them into a call or a download or whatever it might be.
Let's talk a little bit about, I want to ask you about this, the idea of the Dream 500 and account-based selling. And why that, first, what does that mean, account-based selling? Because I do a lot of sales myself for our company, and I'm not sure. And so, even though you hear it thrown around a lot. So tell me how you define that, and then how it relates to the Dream 500 concept that you believe in, that you
Perfect.
do.
Yep, let's do it. Okay, so account-based selling first is when you think about, there's really two methodologies to selling. There's what we call spam your TAM, which stands for total addressable market. So when you're selling, you have a total addressable market, a market total that you are able to address, aka they can potentially buy from you. What you offer is maybe somewhat relevant to them in some way, shape, or form at varying price points. Well, spam your TAM is what we would call like a one-to-many sales outreach, right? So we have a massive list, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 20,000, and we introduce technology and automation to scale our outreach so that we can hit more people, because we're going for volume of outreach with a low conversion, right? So if I go after 1,000 people, we convert 1%, that's 10 leads or 10 deals, whatever you want to however you want to do the math. Well, account-based selling is upside down, right? So think of spam your TAM as a really wide top of funnel, right? So there's 15,000 people you throw on the top of the funnel. You work them through your sales process that is largely driven by technology and volume and automation, and you're getting a very small bottom of the funnel, 1% or less, usually less. Account-based selling is flipping that upside down, right? So with spam your TAM, you're kind of going after the masses and hoping that your dream clients fall at the bottom, which they rarely do. With account-based selling, you flip it upside down and you start with the end in mind. Who is it that you specifically, what accounts do you really want to serve and work with? And then you create a strategy and a playbook that addresses each account as if it's its own campaign, right? So spam your TAM, you might have 15,000. You might segment that 15,000 to lists of 1,000 and create one campaign per segment. So 15 campaigns for 15,000. In an account-based approach, you are treating each account, call it target. You want to go after target. You are treating each account as if it's its own market. And so it gets its own specific campaign. And even a level down, there's different key decision makers involved in that account. Each one of those account or key decision makers also gets a campaign. So it's a very hard to scale, but very high conversion approach to selling. So instead of going after 1,000, converting 1%, we want to go after 500 or 100 and convert 10% or 20%, right? So it's a different, easiest way to explain it, spam your TAM is high volume, low conversion. Account-based is low volume, high conversion.
So there's a couple of pieces there. One is getting really crystal clear about who your 500 or your 100 would be, knowing who are the right people, who are not the right people for you. And then that sounds like a lot of effort, a lot of work goes into pursuing that particular client, making sure that you make a good impression, getting their attention, all the different pieces you were talking about.
That's right. Yeah. So with the account-based selling, it doesn't necessarily take more time, right? We only have so much time in the day. And if we're selling, we're selling. It's just a matter of your volume of outreach is much lower, but it's far more thoughtful. So I can afford to spend all my time going after 50 accounts if I know that over time, I'm going to convert 30% of those, right? Like that's worth my time. It's far more thoughtful. It also has impact, like we talked about earlier. I care a lot about retention. When you have a very thoughtful, empathy-driven, methodical approach to selling and developing a relationship that's built on attention, likability, credibility, then that retention is going to naturally happen because that trust has been built before the transaction happened. And we've continued to build on that. So when it comes to account-based selling, it doesn't scale super well, right? There's tools and technologies and ways to structure your team that does allow you to scale it. But I would argue that not all things that can scale need to scale. Spam your TAM, you have to scale that outreach because it's a volume game. If I want more leads, I need to up my volume. If I want more deals, I need to up my volume. Whereas in account-based selling, if I want more deals, I need to be more thoughtful. I need to be more engaging. I need to be more specific to this one person. And you're gonna get the same exact results, but the effects of a spam your TAM type of approach is you do have brand reputation that gets hurt when you do an automated approach or a technology-driven approach. You can't be personal. You make a lot more mistakes. Secondly, you exhaust your market really fast. If I go after 50 accounts in a year, I can keep doing this approach for a decade and never run out of people, right? If I go after 500 people a month and therefore I go after 6,000 or 10,000 people a year, I'm going to run out of a market eventually. And I've already damaged my brand and I've run out of a market and I have a low conversion. So what do? Right. And so those are the big differences between the two. I would argue you don't have to scale it. You can, and we can talk about how to do that, but.
And as far as your approach goes, so you're kind of medium agnostic, right? Like we've talked about LinkedIn, but you're using email, you're using different approaches to send them. Are you sending gifts? Is it everything and above?
Totally.
Okay.
Everything and above. So the way that we look at it is we have zero romantic feelings about any one tactic. So tactics come and go. What is the most valuable thing you can do when applying an account-based selling approach is insight, right? Because what we believe is insight creates strategy. Strategy informs what tactics you use. So if you go the other way, which is a spam your TAM type of approach, is we need this tactic to work. We have to do this tactic. I've built my business on LinkedIn, driving leads through LinkedIn. Well, what happens when LinkedIn gets saturated? What happens when LinkedIn shuts down your account because you're using a lot of automation tools, right? Then you're up a creek. You have no idea how to acquire new leads. You have to try something new. But what we believe is insights will tell you what strategy, what mediums, what platforms. And then you can actually go pick which tactics I want to use for those mediums and platforms. It's a completely different approach, and everything from LinkedIn to direct mail to cold calling and emailing and IP-based ads and Facebook advertising funnels and gifts, of course, doing giftology like John Ruhlin talks about.
Right.
Those are all components and tactics, but in a silo, tactics don't work if that's not where your dream clients are spending their time or where they're going to convert. So, but you can't know that without the insights.
Yeah. Of course, the challenge for you from a business perspective, or for many businesses, understanding how those different types of strategies work individually enough to use them and use them effectively and not make major mistakes and that sort of thing, which is where you come in. I want to ask you, before we run low on time, about the retention piece. And I kind of have two questions around that. One is, what are some of your strategies around retention, increasing retention? I got the idea that it starts from the very beginning, from the get-go, building good reputation. But then I'm also curious from a business perspective for you, for the business that you run, which is called Tribe Outbound, how you build that into your model so that you are incentivized to perform with your clientele and make that part of the way that you're compensated or judged by the clients. But that's the second question. The first question is just around retention and some of your strategies around it.
Yeah. So if you haven't read Joey Coleman's book, The First 100 Days, I think that's an incredible way to create a strategy around what happens after the deal is done. So whenever they sign the contract and they pay you, oftentimes people just say, well, let's get to work. And then what you're basing your retention on is entirely results. Now, results obviously will always be the biggest driver. If you're not developing or if you're not driving results, people aren't going to stick around. But secondly, is after you're delivering results, people still don't stick around because of one of two reasons. One, you don't think you have likability. So that's an easy one. Two, you don't do a good job of communicating your value. That's honestly, and I work with a lot of agencies, they don't know how to communicate their value. Even if they're driving results, attributing growth and revenue and value to their efforts is incredibly important. Yet most agencies have an average retention of about 18 months with their clients, which is absurd. It's a cycle that will keep you from growing, and it'll keep your profit margins lower if you don't have the ability to extend from 18 months to 3, 4, 5, 6 years with a client. And a lot of it is because you do not know how to communicate your value. You don't know how to do a proper reporting, and those types of things, right? So I think it goes to results, just one, being able to drive results, two, being able to communicate those results, and three, creating likability and value, right? There's Joey Coleman talks about in the first 100 days, there are stages after a purchase that a buyer goes through. There's buyer's remorse, there's elation, so there's excitement. So what do you do during that excitement period to keep that going? There's buyer's remorse. So what do you do when, after about a month and you've been heads down doing work, trying to create results, they have this buyer's remorse of like, I paid all this money. Is this going to work? How do you address that before they even get there? And a lot of that comes down to, and I hate that I beat this word to death, but it comes down to being empathetic, knowing your customer. Just like you try to know your prospects so you can get the deal done, know your customer so you can keep them around.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so the second part of it was just around, since you are a company that is compensated for helping other companies, helping agencies to get clients, how do you, since that's important to you, how did you build that from a business perspective, build that into the way that you're judged or compensated? Yeah,
it's great. I think for me, we eat our own dog food, if you will. So for us, what we do for clients is an account-based Dream 500 approach to going after their dream market. We get zeroed in on who we serve. And so if we're going to tell our clients to do that and we're going to deliver a service around that, we need to be able to do that ourselves. That kind of goes back to your question about knowing all the different avenues and tactical things that you can do. We're our own lab rat, right? So we test everything first with us before we try with a client because we don't want to waste their dollars. And so I think we are able to keep people around, provide value, drive results because of empathy, right? The obvious buzzword. We know our clients super well. They know us super well. We have an incredibly transparent process. We show them exactly what we're doing, who we're doing it with, the results, whether they be good or bad. If they're bad, we own them and say why they're bad and what we're going to do to fix it. If they're good, we'll say why they're good and how we're going to continue to optimize and grow on that. But in terms of like a performance-based model, we are 5 to 10 times more expensive than any competitor, period. I would be hard pressed to believe there's anyone out there that charges what we charge. And I think a lot of that comes from knowing who we serve and being religious or militaristic about who we serve and saying no to everybody else. Because my belief is that if you can provide enough value for the right person, they will pay and they will find the money to pay your fees. And so I think a lot of folks get trapped in this. I don't want to turn business away because I'm saying no to money. I would argue that and say, well, or what if you just got really zeroed in on who you worked with and who you served well, and then focused on serving them really well, and then you quadruple, 5x, 10x your pricing because you're just that much more valuable to them. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of how we work.
Got it. Cool. Well, I think we're running short on time, so I'll wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys, and Joey, you're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And what we want to know is, who do you thank in addition to family, friends? Who are the mentors? Who are the friends? Who are the business partners? Who are the peers? Who are the colleagues? Who are the clients? Who would you acknowledge?
Well, I'll get to the mentors and stuff first, but honestly, and this is not meant to be on a pedestal of spirituality, but I do think that you have to have a North Star, a why. For me, it's my faith in the Lord, my Christian faith. For me, it frees me to be a better business person when I realize that there's a bigger why behind what I do. I can be less desperate in the sale. I could be a better owner. I could be a better vendor to a client if I have a bigger purpose behind my why. So first and foremost, it's the Lord. Secondly, mentors. I have a ton. I would say that one of the OG mentors for me originally, especially in the digital agency space, was Jason Swank, who's now a good friend of mine. Started as a mentor, became a good friend. Vinny Fisher, who runs Fully Accountable, is a big mentor for me, both from a faith perspective, but also just being an incredibly good business person. Outside of that, I would say Jordan Rayner. He's the author of Called to Create, and in his newest book is Master of One. I'm in his mastermind, as well as he's just a good friend and a mentor for me, and helps shepherd me on how do I integrate my faith, which is super important to me and my work. And so Jordan Rayner would be another one. Golly, I have so many. Roland Fraser's become recently a mentor to me, just in helping understand how to do business smarter. Man, who else? Man, I could probably go all day if I think about. And honestly, there's people I don't even know that are mentors to me. People who are authors and folks that have really ministered to me from a business perspective that have made me better in who I am. Bob Berg, who wrote the Go Givers, is super powerful for me. And that book, I reference that book weekly, probably. But outside of that, there's a lot of unsung heroes in my life here locally. My father-in-law. If I'm not allowed to talk about my dad, who definitely is a hero of mine.
It's not that you're not allowed. I just
it's just you want. If more
I don't
of the
exclude
mentors.
that's all people mention is
That's
their
right.
family.
That's right.
So
yeah,
anyway.
a lot of unsung heroes locally. They kind of play the background, but they've been a big support for me.
That's great.
And really pushed me in my career.
Interestingly, the only one of all the people you mentioned who I haven't interviewed on my podcast is Jordan Rayner. So I'll have to interview him.
I'll intro you.
All the other ones are Vinny's great, Jason Swank's great, Roland, Bob Berg. They're all great guys and great mentors.
Well, I will be sure to introduce you to Jordan then.
Thank you. Joey, where can people go learn more about you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, obviously. So linkedin.com/in/Joey Gilkey is an easy one. And then We haven't launched it yet, but it'll be hopefully by the time this podcast is launched. joeygilkey.com is kind of our newest venture, but then obviously Tribe Outbound is a pretty easy one as well to go check things out.
Perfect. Joey, you didn't fail to disappoint. You lived up to the standards of what Jeremy had said, and he elevated the standards very high. So thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate the wisdom.
I appreciate that, man. Grateful to be on.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.